NATO leaders have wrapped up 2 days of talks in Vilnius, renewing their commitment to supporting Ukraine in defending against Russia's invasion. The alliance's annual summit also served as a platform for the G7 club of powerful democracies, which signed off on a declaration to offer Kyiv new security guarantees. But NATO did not give President Volodymyr Zelenskyy what he'd hoped for, a clear roadmap to join the alliance.
President Zelenskyy looks right at home at this first-of-its-kind NATO-Ukraine meeting. It's an upgrade in ties with the alliance, but far from the permanent seat at the table he's set his sights on.
We understand that someone is really afraid of talking about our membership now because nobody is willing to have a world war, which is logical and understandable. Ukraine is fighting, and we truly understand that we can't be NATO members as long as the war continues.
That's because bringing Kyiv into the fold now would spark direct war between NATO and Russia. So Ukraine sought details on how and when the country can join in future. But Germany and the US remained cautious, and the alliance avoided any official talk of timelines. Still, Ukraine won't go home empty-handed.
Since this war began, I've stood with President Zelenskyy, as I just spent about an hour with him, both in Washington, in Kyiv, in Hiroshima, and now in Vilnius, to declare to the world what I say again: we will not waver. We will not waver. I mean that. Our commitment to Ukraine will not weaken. We will stand for liberty and freedom today, tomorrow, and for as long as it takes.
The G7 group of wealthy democracies announced plans for new long-term security assurances for Kyiv. They pledged to keep up arms shipments, to train more troops, and to help Ukraine with reforms and recovery.
These security guarantees are made up of medium-term, short-term and long-term measures. This is not only military support for the right to self-defense through our delivery of military supplies, but also economic guarantees for the reconstruction of infrastructure.
G7 nations also say in the event of future Russian aggression, they'll offer swift and sustained security assistance. Moscow dubbed the declaration a dangerous mistake, but Kyiv called it a much-needed success, taking Ukrainians one step closer to victory, even if the path toward NATO membership still looks long and winding.
And for the Ukrainian perspective, we can bring in Ukrainian MP Kira Rudik. She advocates for Ukraine's integration into the European Union and NATO. Welcome to the show. Ms. Rudik, the NATO summit is over now. How optimistic are you that Ukraine will really eventually become a NATO member after all that we've heard in the past 2 days?
Hello, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure being on the program. Well, you know, there is one thing that we definitely learned over the last 16 months. We learned to hear the word no to many of our asks and aspirations, and we learned to push through that. Last year, around this time, we were hearing so many no's about Ukraine getting the candidacy to European Union, and we were pushing through that. Then we heard so many no's about getting the tanks, the missiles, the Patriot missiles, and right now we heard so many no's about getting the fighter jets that we need badly. But all in all, we know that if we work hard and persuade enough people in the things that we really need and that we believe at, we can get the results. So this NATO summit, it was very good for Ukraine.
So do you think NATO members are serious about offering Ukraine membership?
We think that one day it will happen. And for us, it's enough to move forward with achieving this result. You see the flags behind me, the NATO flag, EU flag, and my party and flag of Ukraine. And it actually not because I want this. Because it is written in Ukrainian constitution that our path is to EU and NATO. It is a desire of Ukrainian people that we as leaders, as politicians, are executing on. And we know that this is our defined path. And if you look back to when the war began when Russia attacked us in 2014, they attacked us because we were very clear about this path to EU and to NATO and not to Russia. And this is why we will be pushing towards it for as long as it takes and no matter how hard it would be, because we know our goal and we know that it is possible. At least what we've heard from these 2 days of NATO summit, nobody said it was impossible. We were talking about political agreements, about the timelines. And for us, it would be enough. As I said, we already learned how to push through the toughest no's. And one of the confirmations of that was that there was an announcement that Ukrainian pilots would be training in different countries. And if you look back, even 2 months ago, it was really impossible. And everybody, literally everybody was telling us no about that.
Yeah.
Look at it right now.
And the face of the push to turn these no's into yeses is President Zelenskyy. Yesterday, he seemed quite frustrated, but today we saw him row back, thanking the allies after saying that what he was seeing there, the attitude NATO was showing, was absurd. So was this in response to US and UK officials saying Ukraine should be more grateful for the aid it's receiving?
Well, you see, we are always grateful. And I don't think that there is any speech of our leaders would be missing a huge thanks to everybody who support us. We are very clear and we are living proof that you can only fight an enemy that is much larger and stronger than you when you are not fighting alone. And we clearly understand that. However, there is a huge difference because all the NATO leaders that were present at this summit, they are going home to their peaceful countries. And President Zelenskyy is going back home where almost every night we are attacked by Russian missiles. And we do not know if we are going to wake up in the morning. And this is why, of course, he is frustrated when the goals that we see in front of us, that we are not achieving them this time. But again, we are grateful. And again, we know that one day we will get them.
There are speculations about NATO saving up Ukraine's accession as a kind of bargaining chip in possible negotiations with Russia. Do you think that this is what's happening right now?
I think that Russia is looking at every hesitance as a weakness. That is absolutely true. And we know that, and President Zelenskyy was very open about that, that every time they see an opportunity, a possibility for themselves, they will use it, and they will use it in their propaganda. Would Russia think right now that it is an opening for a negotiation with them? Absolutely yes. And it is our goal to assure the world and assure our allies that there are no negotiations. No negotiations, no bargaining, for one particular reason. First, we are not trading our people and our territories. But there is a bigger one. As of right now, 9 years into the war and 16 months into full-scale invasion, there is not a person or an organization who can assure that Putin will keep his part of the deal, his part of the bargain. And until there is a mechanism or a way to make sure that Russia would not attack us again, there are no even discussion of the potential negotiations.
All right, that was Kira Rudik. She's a Ukrainian MP. Thank you so much for your time.
Lysia Vasylenko is a member of the Ukrainian Parliament for the opposition Hodos Party. Welcome again to DW News. Good to see you. President Zelenskyy called the NATO summit results good but not ideal. Would you say that's an apt summary of what we've seen today?
I think it's fair. The ideal for Ukraine and actually for the whole international community would actually to see Ukraine as a full-fledged NATO member. And in my opinion, this is something that should have happened a long time ago, maybe back at the Bucharest summit in 2008. Nevertheless, we are where we are. And at this point in time, having at least a political will of the NATO member states to accept Ukraine as a full-fledged member as soon as victory is reached, this is already a good conclusion.
Why then are so many Ukrainians looking for, including Mr. Zelenskyy, this clear timeline for NATO membership when it's near to impossible to get?
The thing to understand is that Russia will always be on the prowl for Ukraine, because Russia is fighting an imperialistic war and sees itself as the great colonial power. So without Ukraine actually being part of a democratic alliance, Ukraine will always be seen by Russia as prey. Now, this will always destabilize the situation in the region and also the global security situation. I think that many defense and security bodies of the NATO member states realize that. And I think that with this in mind, everything should be done to ensure that Ukraine becomes a member of the alliance as soon as.
Is it a tightrope walk for NATO, though, to send a strong message to Russia, but not overly strong as to not provoke Russia into possibly doing worse than it already is? Not that I know what worse would be.
Russia provokes itself. There is nothing NATO member states can or cannot do that will impact Russia's strategy regarding Ukraine and regarding the world, for that matter. As I said, Russia sees itself as a colonial power. Vladimir Putin wants to rebuild the great Russian Empire. Ukraine must be part of that empire, according to Vladimir Putin. And this is his strategy. And regardless of what is done by the United States, the United Kingdom, what policies are adopted in Ukraine, Russia will move along this strategy. The language that they use, that they are being provoked, is just another form of manipulation and just another form of spreading propaganda, first and foremost, to the people of Russia to get the support for this kind of war. This is all that is happening, and I think this has been made clear in the last 16 months of the escalation of Russia's aggression, and especially over the last 9 years when Russia has unfolded a war in the middle of Europe.
You keep saying war, which it is. Do the Russians now believe this is more than a special military operation, especially after such a long time?
What do you mean by special military operation?
Well, the Russians had been sold this war as a special military operation by Russia's leaders. Is that changing in some way, do you think? Do they believe a war is actually going on?
I only have the information about what is happening inside of Russia available from the international sources that still can have access to Russia. And for what we see is that the people of Russia have been subject to a propagandistic state machine for almost 20 years now. And that has yielded its consequences. So whatever is being put forward by the Kremlin is being bought by the Russian people.
What about the strategies of President Zelenskyy? He tweeted that NATO could be using Ukraine's NATO membership as a bargaining chip in negotiations with Russia. Is that what's happening, do you think?
I would be very disappointed if that is so. The only way and the only basis for Ukraine to have negotiations with Russia would be to see a full pull-out of Russian troops from the territory of Ukraine. All other negotiations, while Russian troops are stationed in Ukraine and while Russia is launching missile attacks on Ukraine on a daily basis, these negotiations will yield no results, and any of these results will have to be deemed as null and void, because this will be an agreement under coercion, under force. And as we know very well, under international law, any such agreements reached under force or threat of use of force are deemed null and void. This is exactly what was happening back in 2014-2015 with the so-called Minsk agreements, and I don't think that anyone in the world would like to repeat this sad part of history.
Lastly, NATO says Ukraine can become a member once it fulfills certain preconditions. Are you aware of what those preconditions could be?
Well, NATO is not just about the military standards that an army needs to adhere to become part of the alliance, although Ukraine has proven, especially in the last 16 months, that we are more than capable of meeting these NATO military standards. And we are working towards improving things even more. But NATO is also about a certain political setup in the country. It is about the rule of law. It is about transparent procedures in government affairs. And Ukraine has some issues. I'm being honest here, but despite the war, we are working through them. We are going through the reforms. We are adopting the legislation that is necessary for the country in full, not just the military, to function according to NATO standards. And I think this homework is ongoing, and we're completing it quite successfully, despite the war, despite the daily and nightly attacks. I should say that there should be minimal concerns there, and more of a confidence that Ukraine is able to achieve the standards which are necessary for us to be a full-fledged NATO member.
Well, fighting war at the same time as fighting corruption and fighting for good governance is certainly a huge task. But what better time than now? Ukrainian lawmaker Lesia Vasylenko, thank you very much for being on DW.